week. I'm Una Alexander, and I help you radically love your child to happiness and naturally great behavior. Now, this time last week, last Monday, my son came down late, last minute, to be taken to the train station to get to school. And he came down the drive. I was waiting in the car. He came down the drive with his cereal bowl in one hand, his coffee in the other hand, and his shoelaces kind of trailing. And I wasn't that rested. And for some reason, this really got under my skin. And despite all my teaching about, compassion, allowing things to be there, understanding a child's point of view and all that, I got really irritated. And I said to him, things like, why does he always have to be late? Using that always word, and that I really didn't want to do this anymore, and that he should come down on time, and all these kinds of things. And there was really quite a negative atmosphere between us that morning, unfortunately. And so why do little things sometimes feel like an emergency for us as parents? And if I look at that particular example, it's interesting that when I was his age, I was going to school, being taken to school by my father, and actually sometimes it felt like an emergency when I was late. The atmosphere was very, very tense with my father. And not only that, because things were quite rocky in my family as a whole, and I was the child who'd lean over the banisters, my knees trembling, and listen to the verbal slinging match coming from my parents' bedroom at night. And then I'd be the one going back to my room thinking about what I could say to him, what I could say to her, so that they would get on better. But equally with my siblings, I was the one who, helped make up rows between my parents and siblings, or would keep sibling secrets away from my parents so that they wouldn't go ballistic. And so from a very young age, I was kind of taking responsibility for how things went in the family. And I'm curious, whether you did this too. And for you, it could have been something quite different. It could have been something like, say, if a parent got ill or had to go to hospital or somehow was at home but not really functioning properly, maybe you had to step up and do the cooking, the cleaning, looking after siblings. Or maybe you simply had to be very good because you noticed that things in your home were fragile and you couldn't rock the boat. So you really tried to be, as good as you possibly could be. And so many of us, why I'm talking about this is because what I've noticed is that many of us who are trying to create a lot of security for our children, a lot of safety, and raise a happy family, have actually been trying for a long time to create this kind of safety and security for ourselves, but also for others in the family. We took on responsibility very, very young. So it might have been, you were like a go-between, like I was in the family, going from family member to family member, trying to patch things up for them. Or maybe you were stepping up doing chores, or kind of simply being very good, or any number of other things. It's just that I've noticed this pattern. And because back then we were so small, these things would have seemed, these matters would have felt very big. They would have felt like emergencies. So no wonder now, when things maybe don't go kind of smoothly in the family, or they remind us of those situations back then, we suddenly feel like we're back in an emergency, and we don't know why we feel like that, right? Because, in the case of my son, so welcome to you watching, and you may not have heard at the beginning I told a story of how I, despite everything I teach, and despite despite being a parenting person myself, I actually got irritated with him for being late in the morning, and it felt like an emergency because of these issues, and because it had been for me when I was that age, traveling with my father to school. And so the problem about this can be is that this part of us that had to take on responsibility so young, it's permanently worried that things might fall apart if we're not doing something to keep things together. And the question is that true anymore? Because it felt like that back then. But is it true now that if we're not taking responsibility for things, or if I, for example, in this case with my son, don't take responsibility for him not being, lastminute.com, are things really going to fall apart? I mean, he's 16, right? So in this case of my son, I reflected that actually, it wasn't helpful, and that what I really needed to do was to reassure that part of myself that was worried about this being a kind of, what shall I say, a kind of an emergency type of situation. So I literally had a chat with that part of myself, and I said, I get that you want to keep me safe, and things like that were kind of scary in the old days, but I'm big now, and I've got this, we've got this, it's okay. So I kind of gave this reassurance to this part of myself, and I also kind of did this kind of gesture of handing the thing back to him. He's 16, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for you. If you've got much younger children, you do want to get them breakfasted and get their shoes on properly before they leave the house. But for his age, I felt this was appropriate to kind of hand it back to him, because there are so many things we can hand back to them in terms of responsibility. For example, their feelings, if they're sad, disappointed, angry, if your child is moaning on a country walk, even if they're worried and biting their fingernails, we don't like to see it, we don't like the moaning, we don't want them to be angry, but are we responsible for it? Because when we feel responsible for it, I think that creates a difficult kind of energy. It creates a kind of energy that makes these problems quite sticky. Whereas when we hand it back to them, we're still there as the comforter, the supporter, the problem solver. We're very much there and present, but we're not feeling responsible for it. That's the difference. And so that evening, last week, my son started saying something like, "Oh, I'm sorry about being late this morning." And I said, no, really, actually, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I lost my cool. And actually, it really is up to you. I don't mind if you want to do that and, come out with your coffee and your laces, it's really not a big deal. And I genuinely meant it. And the next day, he did do the same. And I genuinely was quite chilled, and I genuinely didn't mind. So yeah, so this is the kind of work I do with mums that I work with, kind of spiraling back, seeing what actually it was that set up this pattern of believing and pattern of behavior of thinking things are in emergencies. And if you're interested to to help yourself with these triggers, I'm actually going to be doing a free week-long training, so an opportunity to work with me over a week for free. In a few weeks' time. So I'm not asking you to sign up now or anything. Just letting you know that will be coming up, and that will help with this thing of triggers. Okay, so lots of love to you.